Good morning and welcome to the ongoing Bolton & Company webinar series. My name is Robert Krall and I'm an Executive Vice President with Bolton & Company, and I will be your moderator for today's presentation. A few housekeeping items. After the webinar, we will be sending out a recorded link and all the slides that are presented today. And if anybody has any questions during the presentation, please use the question box and we will try and get to as many of those as possible. Today, we have the pleasure of having Daniel Campos as our speaker. He is the CEO and founder of USA West London Consulting. Daniel and his team focuses on supporting customers to continue to grow and pursue strategic objectives with projects and operations, digital transformation, organizational development, and strategy. And without further ado, I give you Daniel Campos.
Thank you, Robert, and the pleasure is all mine. Thank you for having us here. I'll quickly jump to the topic, starting with the agenda. Today's topic is digital transformation. So we'll give it some context first and clearly define what digital transformation is and what it isn't. We'll take you through the phases of how a digital transformation project works, and last but not least, show you success stories that will hopefully inspire you to start your own digital transformation project at your company. So how about some context here? And let me start by something that's a bit cliche, but it's certainly something that's worth talking about. And this is sort of the revolutions in technology. This, it's here to give you a glimpse into really what's going on in how technology is being pervasive. That's what the fourth revolution is all about. Because we hear all, AI, IoT, big data, all of these tech concepts. But what's really important about them is that they will eventually become transparent, as they mostly are. If we talk about AI, for example, we use AI all the time in our devices. And it's so transparent, and it will become even more, such that technology will, invade our lives, so to speak, in ways that we don't suspect. And it's all being built up from all of these steps through time, and it's accelerating. This pervasiveness is also something that you should consider as you go about your executive lives, and you think about your companies, because it's all around us. Okay, a third of all CEOs will now incorporate digital transformation into their strategy. It's a competitive advantage for most companies, and it's a bigger and bigger share of the investment in technology. Something that's also interesting is that, it's a key to survival, but it's also something that's just starting. It's only about 7% of companies in our source here have completely implemented their project. And so it's something that really is just starting. We have a ton of examples in real life of what we see as like the cliche of digital transformation projects, and we'll talk about a few of them, but sort of the shift from taxis to Uber or Lyft and that kind of thing. It's a good example of big picture changes. But what I want to do today is give you something that you can take to your company, and we'll start by agreeing on what digital transformation is. And I like to start usually by defining what things are not. So when we talk to customers, most customers think of digital transformation as the process of installing technology or enabling technology. So for example, implementing a new CRM or an ERP, or going paperless, or implementing e-commerce. This is something that's very common now with COVID, because we no longer meet face-to-face, right? So we want to be able to serve our customers remotely. Business intelligence is a big deal now. Analytics, this whole big data, right? and kind of the extension into this digital presence of companies, or even process reengineering, which is something that we do commonly during while serving customers in operations projects, and that is part of digital transformation, but it really isn't, right? So before I jump into the definition, I want you to think of the concept itself, right? So digital transformation, a two-word concept. And obviously digital means technology, right? There must be something in there. But then think about this second word, it's very powerful, transformation. What are we transforming? When we think of digital transformation, define it formally, what we're transforming is a business model, not just a business process, but a business model. And the digital part in that concept involves the leverage that you have by using information technologies and using that leverage to redefine your business model. So that's quite powerful as a concept, right? It's not just changing or looking at the way you do things, but really going deep. And so this implies that there's a disruption, okay? So we'll talk about the different ways you could use innovation to disrupt your company's value prop. And I think that the most important takeaway that you should have from today's discussion is that we're talking about focusing on customer needs, okay? So that's the complete concept. So we are transforming business models, digital, right? So it's leveraging information technologies. And why are we doing this? We're doing this because we want to serve our customers better, because we're using technologies to be closer to these customers, to anticipate their needs, to be in their day-to-day, right? In their devices or in their life. And so just like we started with this, kind of view of revolution technology, this is something that's parallel. So something that we also hear from companies is that they think about digital transformation as digitization. Okay, so this is think about paperless. Some of us of a certain age may remember going to libraries and kind of for the first time accessing books that are digitized, and you may remember that the way to access them was awful. Still some of those green screens maybe, and it was very hard to find what you were looking for. It was helpful, but difficult to do because it was not digitalized. Okay, so this is the step after that. And so now you can access digitized content. And so in the business context, what this used to mean is not only having a paperless, like a scanned invoice, for example, but a process that lets you look at invoices that are past due. Okay, so this traditionally required the support of IT, and it's a step in this path towards digital transformation. So don't think about these processes as digitization or digitalization. It's another way to focus your thoughts, and it's very important that you think about customer experience and satisfactions in ways that you can measure them, right? So now we're going to start thinking of ways this becomes a reality. So now digital transformation is redefining your business model, right? We already agreed to that. And it's not digitization or digitalization, but it's something more that requires goals, okay? And I'm going to give you a couple more concepts and kind of go into how to make that a reality for your company. And so goals or measurable goals is one of them. And the types of disruption are the other. And so we wanted to bring this to you because sometimes it's hard to think of where to start. Even though we're going to give you examples and sort of a methodology that you can follow, where are we really going, right? So it's helpful to think of these famous companies, like the taxi to the Uber or Lyft, or kind of the hotel to the Airbnb kind of thing, because it allows us to think of ways that we can, or directions that we can take to change our business model. Right? So types of disruption, there are two: business disruption and customer. And so when you think of sort of these couple of ways that you can change your business model. You could change the technology, the architecture, or the business model, right, itself. So this is a good example of Airbnb, but also using technology in a different way for your industry or your customers and services you provide. Or you can think of kind of product disruption. And so there are ways that this takes place. You could go high end and say, well, there are customers out there in the extreme of the market that I can target and change my services this way, leveraging technology. You can simplify, really make it so easy to access that, this is another way to do it. You could completely change the business model. So maybe, separate it, the market, the supply chain, insert your company in other ways in the market. Or you can, kind of integrate your services into value. So these will stay here when you'll get a copy of the presentation afterwards. But think of these as paths that you can take, and they'll take more shape as we go into the phases. So enough with definitions, right? Remember, it's about customer. That's the most important concept for you to keep in mind. Okay. In this part of the presentation, what I'd like to do is take you through the typical phases that companies take to implement the digital transformation process in their companies. And this is something that we do for customers in our practice. And so there are 4 steps, okay? Very quickly. There's the analysis and identification step. And so this is where we look at customer needs and find gaps. There's a transition into a roadmap. So this means that now we understand where we're going. We're going to put it in something that we can all follow. So describe where we're going, who's going to do what partners are we going to use, and what are the gaps that we're closing. There's an execution process. And so something that we encourage customers to do is to think of this as an iteration. So don't just say we're going to have a digital transformation project. It's rather something like we're going to start a digital transformation journey. And so this is the first step, and there'll be further steps as we close circles, right? So very quickly into how these phases work. So phase 1 is a description of where your company is going. So this is when you refer back to those slides that I just showed you, and you think of ways that your company can be transformed, your business model could be transformed, your services can be transformed to satisfy customer needs, and in ways that can mean perhaps that you have a new business plan, okay? This is a kind of an introspection of the way your company runs. And so there's always this context of who your competitors are, adjacent industries or processes that you have to think about, what your structure looks like, the kind of processes you have. Maybe you have to explore those processes a bit deeper. What data is available to you, the skill sets and culture of your company. And so this becomes this analysis of resources and capacities, and they're matched to the potential disruption and what your customers need, okay? The outcome of this phase is this big picture strategy in your first stab at this digital transformation project. And it leads directly into phase 2. And so you'll spend a lot of time in phase 2. You want to spend a lot of time and be very thorough in this, because you'll work on 3 main things. You want to do end-to-end journeys. And so this is something that if you've been reading around this topic, it's a fairly popular one, so customer journey mapping. And so what this is a description of the path that a customer takes in interacting with your company. And so this is easy to explain if you think of somebody that maybe buys something online, and maybe you get an ad from on your phone, maybe on Facebook, or some sort of way that makes you aware of a product. And then the journey that we've all taken, right? You go on the website, you browse, maybe you see the discount, you look at the price, you put it on the cart, you enter your credit card, maybe there's an issue, maybe not. Shipping, arrival, testing, returns, sort of the end to end. And I mean, truly the end to end, all the way to those return events, or events that maybe don't happen to every customer. So because we've all done this, buy something online mostly, it's easy to explain it that way. But customer journey can mean very complex activities, depending on your industry. So if you're in insurance, if you're in education, if you're a manufacturer, the customer journey tends to have many different touch points, because now it's not a consumer, but it's perhaps a company, or it's a client that has family and has an event, right? So now you have all these different players that complicate the customer journey mapping exercise. So once again, this is very important that you spend the time to do thoroughly. And it's this exploration and this recognition of what customers really go through, right? So this involves, you can imagine, right, interviews of what steps to really take. It takes observation, perhaps, if you could think about this, record a customer as you interact with them in the different steps they take. You can really go all in. The more you do it, the better you do it, the more insight you'll have, and the better it is to have that information to drive your transformation. This is where Uber, for example, discovered that the biggest deal was the taxi finding the customer, right? So that's really is the magic behind Uber. Everything else is gravy, but just saying bring a car to me and you're there, it's sort of the kind of discovery that you want to have in these end-to-end journeys. Then what you want to do is map your internal capabilities, and this also involves kind of going deep. We've got a few ideas of what you can think about here. And so technology and just the talent of your company, and kind of culturally, and the type of experts you have within your company, and think about then the ecosystem that your company lives in, and the kind of partners you have, what they bring to the table, and what kind of benefits you can derive from them. And don't worry if this is kind of conceptual. We'll really dive into the nitty-gritty and how that applies to companies in real life. Keep this in mind. 3 pictures here during phase 2. How your customers interact with you, a map of your internal capabilities, that data, the people, that expertise, and those that surround you. So if you have a supplier of your software that you use to calculate incidents of potential events with your customer, or if you've got somebody that tracks your orders, those are all partners. So ultimately what's going to happen is during phase 2, you'll find these gaps, because you come from phase 1, right? You're saying, okay, this is a transformation I want. Now this is the gap that is keeping me from serving customers this way. And these are the technologies or capabilities that I'm leveraging. And so now you've got a project after phase 2, what you want to implement. And this is something that you probably do today, right? You've got a plan, you distribute the plan, you want to drive that culture change because we're improving how we serve customers. So now, we have to communicate it to your staff and kind of turn into a movement, if you will. And so a few things that, look at 1, 2, 3 here, a few things that I want to point out that make a difference in digital transformation projects is 1, think about agile project methodologies. If you don't know what that is, there's a ton of literature. We're not going to go into it, except to say that instead of this sort of 6-month project that you start and then it's kind of blind, agile is all about short-term goals that you meet, and some of them are maybe silly, right? But they'll be so silly that they are just building blocks. And they become serious after a couple of iterations. And the second thing to point out here is, so measure. It's very important that in these projects that they are grounded to the operation somehow. Okay. Finally, what I'd like to do is in phase 2, when you set up the changes in the company, set up for that project rollout, is that you make sure that you've got this deep, very efficient feedback loop. And it's not just how are we doing with the project, but as you deploy iterations of the project, that you talk to clients, that you talk to the staff that's and the front lines, and inquire about this process. It's very important that you don't just rely on what you did on phase 1 and then can start rolling out and not consider that this is really a learning process for your organization. Now, when we get to phase 4, this is hopefully once you've done your first transformation and you've launched that new app or that new communication channel to your customer, because now you're giving them real-time information on the status of that order, or helping your employees become better partners for your company, et cetera, et cetera. Now you have this process that becomes a continuous improvement loop. And so think of your first project not as a way to just transform your company, but your company's services, but think of a way to transform your company into being more flexible, more agile. And so you have to be purposeful in building this feedback loop that finds new digital transformation opportunities, because you've done it once. Now you have a company that knows what this looks like, knows what a customer journey is. So maybe now you identify the next customer segment to map. Maybe you identify the next product or service to map for, and then drive customer satisfaction, identify technology that you can leverage, find potentials or improvement goals, and then guide them through the company. Okay. Enough with the concepts. I know that this is a lot. I think that this is a part where you can really take it home, and hopefully I'll be able to do that and inspire you by describing these 3 success stories. And I'll give you a pause here for you to think about what we've done so far and send me your questions. I know there's a lot. So remember, there's a Q&A a panel to your right floating there. Please use it and send me your questions. All right. Onwards with the success stories, and I'll start with this. Okay, so all of these are companies in the US. All of these are middle market companies that look just like yours, with executives that are doing their best to serve their customers. They've been in the market for a good couple of decades, most of them, and they're successful companies. Okay. And I'll start with this. This is a dairy product manufacturer. Is a real example. Okay. So what was happening at this company? So what you'll notice is that we're mapping the phases, so you can imagine what that process looked like using the methodology we just showed you. Okay. So phase 1 is all about kind of imagining, right? So where can we go? Where are we? What's going on here? So they looked at the reality, and they identified a few opportunities. Sales that were plateauing, still growing, but very slowly, very organically. Customer service issues. They were starting to get a higher incidence than they wanted to have of customer complaints. They were being challenged by new regulatory requirements on traceability, and they wanted to have more granularity on costs. And so when they came down to it, they were saying, customers deserve and expect orders to be shipped complete and on time, and we're clearly not doing that because we're getting more complaints. And sales need to improve, with service and efficiency. So That's very normal, right? It's something that we all want to do. So it's a transformation that is squarely in line with their core business, right? They're not necessarily going out and building microchips into their cheese, right? What they're saying is, let's realign our resources so we can have an improved sales model, so we can integrate technology and tools so that our employees can use them. And hopefully we can automate some data so we can bring it to those decision makers as we can. So during phase 2, they completed end-to-end journeys on what? They did order fulfillment, so customer experience, as they placed and got their orders and maybe process returns. We also helped them do process mapping on sales reps as customers, right? So that's unusual, but they are customers of a certain internal department. So they were, requesting product, placing those orders, maybe doing invoice or payment status, et cetera, et cetera. And something that we worked on quite a lot with was internal capabilities and partners. So because this company is not new, they have a ton of capacity that we could leverage because they had a lot of history. They had sophisticated systems in place that they were perhaps able to increase in utilization. And certainly they wanted to have more sophisticated processes. And so we supported them in finding or defining what kind of visualization they needed for data, the type of routing software, and a few other things here, okay? So during phase 3, this company designed a plan so remember, this is project setup, right? So a weekly progress review with a very short-term goals in different sprints. So think of a project that lasted perhaps 6 months, goals for every 2 to 3 weeks, okay? They also looked at their internal capabilities and figured that their staff could use training on leadership, on management skills, because we're giving them new tools that they needed to use to tweak their operations as they happened, more or less in real time. So we wanted to give them the ability to do that with their staff. And so we implemented this feedback. So what ended up happening, and this is where the digital transformation takes place. So what happened is they gained the ability to look at real-time sales KPIs in a handheld with just independently by the sales reps. Okay, this sounds simple, but in an industry like this where they have thousands of orders, right, thousands of lines every day, and there's so frequent services and so many different things happening that it was very challenging to do before. And that simple change enabled sales reps to transform their process. Okay, so remember, this is changing your business model, leveraging technology, not the other way around. So we were not implementing these sales KPIs just for the sake of the technology, but because we wanted to support better decision making on order placement, on traceability of delivery, on and then kind of get some of the benefits here. So now there's a virtuous circle here where supervisors had a set of goals and objectives for those sales reps. They had real-time information to leverage to increase customer satisfaction. And there was a closed loop now to identify opportunities for ongoing growth, because now we have the analytics to find customers that perhaps were not buying the entire assortment, or find customers that were losing volume in certain assortments, but gaining as an account. And something that I want to point out here, and this is where you should strive to do this in your digital transformation project. They had sales increases. They were looking at reduced returns from trade and an increased fulfillment rate. And very importantly, project payback, okay? If you start with these principles in mind, they'll flow through the project and you'll be able to measure returns on digital transformation projects. Okay, so that's a quick example for a dairy processor. Let me take you to example 2, and this is it's a completely different industry. Okay, This is a furniture manufacturer. Okay? Think of a national company that serves boutique customers. So most of what they sell is custom. You go to a store, you look at the catalog, you look at examples, and you specify custom measures, custom fabric. Maybe you bring your own fabric, and that's sort of the experience. Okay, and so this company was looking at some issues. They had delayed deliveries. They had trouble sending data, updated data on what the supply chain was doing at the store level. They had issues with material planning because they had no visibility in procurement of the type of orders they were starting to produce at the store level. And all of this was done manually, So imagine this company has hundreds of orders that are at different stages. And think of like a whiteboard with little magnets on them, right? So that's sort of what they were doing, with multiple systems being informed, because they had order processing on one, production tracking on another, et cetera, et cetera. So they decided to transform the experience of customers that expect accurate delivery times. So with a new customer interaction model. So now, there's a process, and we, as consumers, we experience this everywhere we go, right? That's consistent. So you go to, for example, like Starbucks, and we're already kind of trained on how these things work, and especially, on the way, the drink names are turned around for ease of use. So you already kind of speak that language as well. So that's what we wanted to do, specify a new standard for interaction, and that would improve service and guarantee production readiness, right? So once again, phase two, same process. What's the end-to-end journey of these customers as they go to a store, look at models, request quotes, and confirm orders, deposit payments, and all of the steps were until delivery, right? And also look at stores as customers. So this is something that you see already as a trend. Not all customers are customers. Some of them are internal. We looked at the way they were using existing data and systems, and also identified technology. So that is a part of every project. But remember, we're starting from the customer's needs first. Now, the rollout for a company like this is different. So the project planning has a personality of its own because it follows after the client's culture. But you do have to think of sort of this reality of where the company is, and all of the stores where they are, and how many of them are open in different time zones, etc. So some of these considerations were built into the phase three, like project planning and project system process. And we implemented over the course of about 6 months for supporting this company and building the virtuous circle of the digital transformation project one. So you can see it here, continuous order status monitoring, because we can now use a consistent customer experience to feed this data to decision makers, which help them have complete and accurate visibility of each order and its stage. This helps all of the players along the chain to have real-time data, as opposed to, where's my order? Did you buy the fabric yet? Is the frame available and sized according to those special needs, right? Now it's all available real time. And that leads to improved customer satisfaction, because now we're running a journey that was designed, and not just, it didn't just appear. It's something that's been now built on purpose. And so that allowed the company to adjust production planning and increase customer satisfaction. Once again, you can see some benefits here. Manufacturing productivity was increased. Inventory value was reduced because they had more visibility of what was coming, so they could be more efficient in their procurement processes. And they were also able to increase sales because they had a process that was designed, and that process allowed those sales reps to take the customer by the hand in a consistent way, leading to project payback. So once again, this This is not Uber. This is not Airbnb. This is a company that is sticking to their core values of customer satisfaction and transforming their internal processes to satisfy customer needs. All right, on to the third example. And this is, once again, a different industry. This is a CPG manufacturer, and it's about profitable promotions. So this is a case where customers are so distributed that it really makes it challenging to frame this as a project. And they were able to do it just targeting a piece of the transaction of a larger customer journey. So if you're not familiar with how these things work, you more than likely have been part of this. If you've ever used a coupon at a supermarket store, for example, maybe you don't know how that process, what all that entails, but you know how easy it is for customers to do it, right? So you just get to that cashier and you say, I've got a coupon, and they scan it. So think about what that does. It will reduce the price that you're paying for that item, let's say by 50 cents. And those 50 cents are actually paid by the manufacturer. So at some point, the product that was bought a month ago, delivered to the store a week ago and placed on the shelf, and then you buy it, that discount has to be passed back to the supplier, right? And so in an extended supply chain, like we have for most markets nowadays in the US, that supplier is probably not the manufacturer. It's probably a distributor or a sub-distributor. And so there may be 2 or 3 steps away from the actual supplier that need to be kind of worked back to credit 50 cents to the store for processing the coupon. So that's the complexity that this company is facing. And so an extended supply chain with a budget that is very hard to manage, policies throughout the supply chain that are difficult to understand, because imagine you're selling to the distributor, that distributor has sub-distributors that have their own policies, and then they go to a store, and that store has its own policy. So, not poorly documented, and all kind of leading to unjustified charges. So you're investing in these brands, and then perhaps maybe you're not getting your profitability or the ROI that you need. So what they wanted to do is transform this process, certainly by looking at investing their funds in profitable promotions, okay, and certainly making it easy for customers to interact with them. So not ordering the product, not getting the product to the stores, not battling on time and full deliveries of product, but rather that small, highly sensitive issue of squaring off accounts, right? And so the end-to-end journey is quite complex. They were able to analyze past promotions, look at the extended supply chain map, and align their processes to an existing trade promotion management software, which was a key partner here, and set objectives. And so very importantly, phase 3 was all about that multidisciplinary team that worked on very short sprints. And so for them in particular, they had an IT team that was not on site, and they had financial stuff somewhere, and they had sales and trade promotion manager. So a lot of different moving pieces. What we were able to help this customer do is realign the investment. Think about like year-end planning for next year, that marketing plan, where are they going to invest, which brands and products, and how is that going to flow into customers, distributors, sub-distributors, and how do we measure compliance to these promotions while increasing customer satisfaction. So the digital transformation process here, once again, sticks to the core of what the business is, right? They're selling and they're investing in their brands through their distributors, down to like buy 2 get 1 free kind of promotion, and flowing those chargebacks in ways that we can measure and that we can continue to invest in partnership with customers. So identifying the profitable deals and kind of flowing those processes back to monitor the deductions and making it in ways that the customer is happy to do, right? Because customers want those funds channeled to produce more volume. So it's a win-win situation, absolutely. And so finally, you'll see here that there are a ton of benefits. You know, they discovered a 5%, more or less, promotional budget, piece of the budget that was unjustified, and certainly reduced reconciliation time because all of the data was centralized within this unique system, you know, one single system that customers and employees could use. And so project payback once again. 3 good examples of companies that ran their projects that used this 4-phase approach, and that most importantly understood that they were not trying to emulate these very famous kind of highly disruptive cases, but rather focus on their business and think about you know, ways to serve their customers better. And so this is what leads me to final thoughts. And once again, I'll stop here briefly and ask that if you have any questions, please write them in your Q&A box. But let's before we get there to your questions, let's end where we started. Okay, and this is something that I want you to take home, think about, you know, put it in the context of your business, and hopefully we're inspiring you to take that step of starting a digital transformation process. Remember, as a final thought, if you're going to take anything home with you, the transformation we're referring to is the business model, okay? And the digital part of that concept is the information technology that you're leveraging, okay? We gave you up front in the presentation a couple of ideas of what that disruption may look like, the different types of disruption that you could consider. But ultimately, what really needs to happen is if you're going to do this digital transformation, is think about your customer needs and think about customer needs all the way. That is what makes these digital transformation projects successful. And all right, I think that's all the material we have for today, and hopefully I've given you enough time to think about your questions, and you know, I'm happy to answer them now. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Daniel. That was very informative. We've got several questions here. The first one: how much should a company budget for a digital transformation project?
That's a great question. I think you know, budgets can be very low, surprisingly low, because what you're leveraging may already be in your company. You may already have it. You may already have the ERP. That ERP may already have the capabilities you need, you know, to drive the visibility, the reporting, the customer communication. It may be something that you just need to tweak or, you know, adjust the way it was implemented. Another way to answer that question is that you should think of these projects as investments. They need to be justified. You need to have a target, and they should return on that investment. And in that way, you know, could it be 100,000? Could it be 500,000? Absolutely. But is it going to return on it? Is it going to pay for itself? Then it's a win-win for everyone.
Great. The next question: how long does it take to complete a digital transformation project?
Thank you for that. I would say our experience is these projects should be short, or as short as possible on purpose. They typically start in the 3-month range, more or less, you know, to go through the first iteration of those phases. And maybe what happens is you start a new iteration after that. If you've got a very complex company, maybe what happens is you roll out changes. So if you have let's say, operations on 2 coasts or many different states, you may want to focus on the first state and then roll out to a few others. But you should think of compact, very short, or as short as possible, projects that are as short as possible.
Great, thank you. The next question. During these times, everyone is thinking about budgets, less expenses, and some are just trying to survive as a company. Why should a company invest or outsource a project like this instead of doing it in-house?
Okay. I don't think there's a rule, but rather it's a matter of going through phase 1 and figuring out if what you want to do is built into your company already. A lot of companies will certainly be able to do this on their own, and maybe what you outsource is the knowledge of, let's say, the agile project management, or maybe you rely on partners that you will eventually continue to use as you roll out your capabilities. But if this is something that you haven't done, or something you're just learning to do, and maybe you've got leadership within the company, it's not something that comes naturally. And I would argue that that's perhaps the best way to think of outsourcing some of these functions. Just bring that knowledge into the company, and then eventually make it part of the company. That's what the whole kind of continuous improvement process looks like. It's no longer something that you have to outsource, but it's built into the facility or your organization and culture. Definitely strive for that.
Great. The next question is, what are some of the best customer service softwares out there, like a Salesforce?
Like CRM. This is something that is evolving rapidly. I mean, if you go, certainly if you can afford a Salesforce because it's pricey, and your process is complex, obviously they're the leaders in what they do, and they'll be able to offer anything. Say the same thing about most software categories. But there are offerings in all price ranges, and it really depends on how much customer marketing you're trying to do. So I would leave it at that, because that's what tends to set the CRM companies apart. If it's just CRM, they all do the same, but that integration with a massive amount of customers is where you can really benefit from automation. Salesforce is great at that. HubSpot is wonderful at that, and so they're all trying to do this. However, I will come back to the idea that digital transformation is not about implementing software. It's not about implementing an ERP. It's not about any of that. You're leveraging these technologies, and you should think about your customer journey first. So that's why I was referring to the sort of the automation or how close you want to be to the customer as designed. Because if you can, hopefully you've been part of these customer interactions as a customer, how magical it is that you place an order and then you get a text, and then maybe UPS sends you and must notice that the package is 3 stops away. And so that is where you then start to consider the capabilities of the CRM and then pick the right one for what you're trying to do, and not the other way around. I would say go for the least expensive one that will cover you for the next 5 years for what your customer journey is. And that may be the leader, but it doesn't have to be.
Great. How do you get clients involved in the design process?
When you do the customer journey, you have to be creative. Most companies have like the trusted customers that have been with them for the longest time. They're really a partnership relationship. And that's certainly where you feel like you need to start, it may be a way to map your kind of standard customer interaction map, customer journey map to begin with. But you do have to be creative because the customers on the fringes of your core business may be those that you can grow the most with, and the outreach can be difficult, right? Because they're already on the fringes, right? So they're not maybe recurring customers that buy every month, or they're customers that only buy one product and not your entire suite of offerings. So you can survey them, you can formally, sometimes you can pay for them to participate in kind of mapping exercises. But it is challenging. Companies have to be shrewd about picking up on the signals that customers give them, especially dissatisfaction, right? Of those broken loops where you send them a promo and maybe they don't respond, or when you're asking them to kind of convert their policy to the next level, and there's 80% of them won't even read the message, because those customer touch points are in your design today, whether it's been designed or it's just kind of emerged from history. And if you're going to think of a different way, you do have to involve them. So try to do it as much as possible, and pay for it, if you have to. Ultimately, remember the insight that you're looking for, you may not know what it is. So think of that aha moment of Uber kind of narrowing down that opportunity where, oh yeah, it's about the taxi finding you without you having to spell it out, right? Turn by turn. That is magical, right? Yeah, payments, but this is the moment. And so that's actually what you're looking for. You're mapping your customer journey, but those points where you're losing customers in your pipeline, or losing customers that are existing and kind of switching companies to your competitor, those are the points that you're looking for. So definitely, go after them as much as you can.
Great. Who should lead this project, and how much investment related to the sale should we consider?
All right, those are two questions. Who should lead this project? Most of the time, we ask, this is our practice, but your mileage may vary. We ask like the top leadership to lead it. At some point, like the CEO, even the board should be involved in setting the goal. And this is because these kinds of projects have the possibility of transforming the business model, right? That's what we're talking about. So it's not something that you can easily do without that sort of involvement of top management. And then on a daily basis, then you'll have don't make it an IT project. Is the best thing I could say about this. Make it at the very least a multidisciplinary team. But the best projects we see are led by the users, or like the actors themselves, because they are the ones that touch customers. They hear from customers. They see customers leave or switch or have to face their objections. So those folks are closer to the problem. Take it away from IT because it's not technology. Now, there was another part to that question. What was that again?
How much investment related to the sale should we consider?
I'm not sure I understand that question, but maybe I'll try to answer in two ways. So time-wise, it can be an involved process. There's a lot to do here. If you are trying to picture in terms of, are we throwing the house into this? You shouldn't. It really depends on each industry. But for these companies, they really are not doing anything that could jeopardize their profitability. I would say these are by nature because you are going about these projects in an agile way. So once again, there's a lot of literature here. you're not investing everything up front to then see if it works. So in that sense, it's something that should be approachable by most companies.
Great. Okay. The next question is, how big are the companies in the examples you gave us today?
Yeah. So these are mid-market companies. They're not small. Let's say they're in the $100 to $300 million range. They have, let's say, 50 to 300 employees. So not small, not huge. I think this is part of the deal here. I mean, companies that strive to be big, I would argue this is what they need to do to get to that stage. Redesigning their service model, being disruptive in the markets they serve. And that is what enables sort of this explosive growth. You know, in every industry, there's this curve, like the early adopters, and then sort of this big space where you know, most companies live. And then, you know, back then, you know, the small tail of that curve, the laggards, right? I would argue that the big companies that get big are at the forefront of change. And remember, we saw at the beginning of the presentation, this is something that is really starting. It's it's a you know, common concept, but it's finally the culmination of this fourth revolution in technology, and how it's that pervasiveness. Remember, we talked about this early on, how this technology is now finally enabling the day-to-day users to leverage those possibilities. So if you haven't started, you're not late. Once again, you know, hopefully we're inspiring you to think about the possibility of technology in your company, and start today. You know, think about your customers, think about those pain points like we were showing you in these few cases. They're all around you. That's friction that you have to deal with every day. Put it on paper, think about them in terms of that customer and the journey they go through, and then map it out and build a plan. And you're already doing digital transformation. That's it. It's as easy as that. You don't have to think about millions of investment. You don't have to even think about technology. This is about you, your customers, and that intimate relationship that you can build. And the more intimate it is, the more successful you'll be as a company. That's the real opportunity here.
Great. Well, I think that does it. We're at the end of our time. I want to thank Daniel for your very informative presentation today. Just as a follow-up, we will be sending out a copy of the presentation and a copy of the recorded webinar. If you do have any questions, sorry we couldn't get to all of them, please feel free to reach out to Daniel or myself, and we will get those questions answered for you as quickly as possible. Again, thank you all for joining us today. And Daniel, again, thank you very much. And everybody have a great day and stay safe out there. Thank you.
Thank you all. It's been a pleasure.